As a video game genre, visual novels are interesting to say the least. Well, actually most people just find them boring. They're opposite to what you think a video game is supposed to be. And that's due to the fact most people see the gameplay as non-existent, and what you may see as gameplay is exactly the same no matter which visual novel you pick, meaning that there's really no variety in the genre. To the average person, all visual novels are just reading with dialogue options. And to be fair, they are. And because of that, a vast majority of people don't see visual novels as true games, even to the point where people think they're the most pointless form of media even outside the gaming sphere. But they're still an important genre when we're talking about the entire gaming landscape. Some of these games and franchises have very dedicated followings, and a lot of these series are household names if you play more than 10 games in your life. I bet if I was to name 5 visual novels, you would know at least 4 of them. And some of those games that first come to mind have cultural significance that rival some of your favorite games. But even as I say that, there's still a lot of people who think visual novels are pointless. If visual novels are so culturally important, why do people think they're so pointless? It's for the same reason why people don't want to pick them up. It's just reading. Why can't you do this in a book or manga or a movie? Hell, you can even put it up on webtoons and people would think it's a more efficient way of telling a story. But when you look at it like that, you're grossly undervaluing the entire genre. And it makes it seem like the existence of visual novels are the hardest thing to defend, when in reality it's really not. Storytelling in video games has always had a rocky relationship. If you took a poll and asked gamers a simple question, does the story in a video game matter? A good portion of those players are going to say no, because it doesn't really affect the gameplay at the end of the day, and that's why they bought the game. Another chunk of equal size is going to say yes, because without a good story, the game can't be good. Which, if you're asking somebody like me,
bro, what are you talking about, man?
Then you have people who fall in the middle, where the story is necessary, but it isn't important to their experience. The story could just be motivation to get through a game, or something extra to keep you grounded in the world. No matter which camp you fall into, most of the games you play have a static story. For being in an interactive medium, video games don't really take advantage of the fact that they are video games, when it largely comes to their stories. You might have a game where you have different endings, but those are usually reserved for role-playing games. But even when you're talking about JRPGs, there's still usually a true ending that you're supposed to strive for, meaning the story is just as static as your average story game. Visual novels, for the most part, are not like this. Because of their more simple gameplay, they're able to take advantage of the interactivity of the medium when it comes to their storytelling. And that alone justifies their place as a video game and as a medium. A visual novel's story is vastly more reliant on being a video game than 90% of all other video games. Think about your favorite video game story. Could that story just not be a book or a movie? And if you think I'm talking out my ass, the best example of this is The Last of Us. That is a very story heavy game. People hold that game's story very high. And because of the story alone, it's seen as one of the best games of our decade. But it didn't really have to be a game in the first place. I've never heard anyone rave about The Last of Us gameplay. Ever. When speaking on if The Last of Us or The Last of Us Part 2 is a good game, the only thing that is really brought up is the story, which is perfectly fine. But when we're talking about video games making use of their medium to tell better stories, it doesn't do that. There are many people who watch The Last of Us as a TV show, not knowing it's a video game and being confused how this could be a video game. Because in their eyes, video games are supposed to be interactive. How can you not have choice in an interactive medium? Obviously, these are people who've never picked up a controller in their life or ever looked at a video game, because a linear story in a video game is not crazy. But then it's weird how people who do play video games see visual novels as unimportant media because all they do is tell a story, not aware that there is a lot of things that go into a visual novel that doesn't happen in your average video game story, when we're talking about how the story is laid out itself. And that's why there are a lot of visual novels with dedicated fan bases. They offer a lot of experiences that you can't get anywhere else when looking at other games. A lot of the hate and stigma the games get are from outsiders looking in. And yeah, maybe some of the stigmas are a little justified, but when you're an outsider looking in, that's all you could base your opinion on. And because of that, I want to go on a visual novel arc. I want to play a handful of visual novels and see what the hype or lack thereof is about. I'm not gonna lie, picking a visual novel was not the easiest task, because I'm already not a long dialogue type of person. I have to force myself to not skip dialogue options in RPGs. And in fighting games arcade mode, I haven't read a single piece of dialogue, I swear. And now all of a sudden I'm just gonna be reading all the dialogue. Yeah, this is gonna be hard. So I'm gonna have to skip anything that's over 20 hours. So that gets rid of a lot of classics like Tsukihime and Fate Stay Night. I actually did try to play Tsukahami a few years ago and got completely bored of it, so yeah, I don't really have a good background in this. If I take some liberations, just bear with me. But I think that's going to be good because we could look at games slightly out of the genre that still kind of fit that visual novel mold, to see if they're using the power of the medium to their advantage. This came out to be way longer than I thought, but if you stick with it, I appreciate it. And by the end of this, I'm not really trying to have you start playing visual novels out the blue. If I at least am able to change your perspective on visual novels, then I'm gonna say I did a good job. I really don't want to spend no more time on this intro because I spend way too much time on these games. Let's roll the first. The first game on my hit list is Atlas's Catherine Full Body. What you mean this don't count? This game is all dialogue with some puzzles in between. So what, we're not allowed to move in a 3D environment no more, talk to people and shit? You're out your damn mind if you think I'm gonna start this arc by sitting and reading all day, hitting left click until I get a cramp. The reason why I wanted this to be my first game is because I think Atlas makes cool games. I wanted to start off with something easy for me to stomach before I go off into the deep end. So for all you visual novel lovers, you're just gonna have to sit this one out for a bit. But I think you should stay and hear me out on this. Alright, back to Catherine. This game is good. If you consider yourself a fan of visual novels and you haven't played Catherine, you're missing out. If you could tolerate the constant puzzles, you will be fine. The puzzles aren't even that crazy, for the most part. But that doesn't matter because we're here for the story, which is about a guy who accidentally cheats on his girlfriend, named Catherine, who I will be referring to as Karen, with a random woman who just keeps waking up in his bed, Catherine, who I will be referring to as Siren. There's also an extra pink hair girl who will be giving the main character butterflies, and her name is also Catherine, or Rin for short, so that's what we're going to be referring to as. And for about a week or so, we watch as our protagonist has nightmares, wake up, cheat, on accident, go to the bar to drink with his friends, go to sleep, rinse, and repeat. During those said nightmares, you will play as Vincent climbing up these stupid ass towers and... Wait, Atlas game. Towers? Fuck it, I don't even care no more. After every stage, you enter a confession booth, where the voice inside your head will ask you questions about your preferences inside a relationship. For example, are you gonna let your partner go out in a thong or not? And a little bonus, you actually get to see what other people around the world think, and the graphs are actually split between men and women, so you can actually see if there's any gender bias between the answers. If you haven't caught on, the answers you pick ultimately decide your ending, and which of the two girls you end up with, indicated by this love-o-meter. But these questions aren't the only way to change or influence the meter. At night when you're at the bar, you get to move around, talk to people, and respond to text messages from either one of the Catherines. All these little choices you make influence the bar in one way or another. And that's basically the entire point of the game. When it comes to the game being classified as a visual novel, I'm gonna have to say it's like a cool 7 out of 10. Sometimes it's just cutscenes that will last for like 14 minutes. And yet the puzzles are still somehow half of the entire game. Maybe I just suck? But when the puzzles aren't making you feel slow, or maybe just me, Catherine is such a calm, cozy fall type of game. One of those games you just gotta play after a long night of work or something. Probably in the comfort of your own room for reasons that should already be obvious. But with a soundtrack like this, how could you not want to unwind? Dialogue options are plentiful but never individually strong enough to really change the course of the game on their own. Like, you know, the answers you pick affect your ending, but in the moment to moment scenarios, there's not really much that they really do. But because they're so plentiful, you never feel like you're bottlenecked into one of those endings. The questions in the confession booth could be a little too broad. Like, you understand the question being asked, but without the proper context, it's a little hard to just pick one of the two extremes. But if you wanted to play for one of the Catherine's endings, it's pretty obvious which ones you should be answering. And I think that's the only place Catherine falters, is that as a visual novel, you don't really get no surprises with your answers. It's just, if I want to get with Karen, I gotta answer like the wife is always right. But if you don't really care about which Catherine you get and you're just answering all the questions honestly, I think that is the best way to play. Just don't go into this game thinking that the puzzles are going to be secondary and that you're just going to blast through them. Because I promise you that is not how the game goes, and I trust you will be leaning in your seat just to finish some of these puzzles. Besides that one puzzle, I thoroughly enjoyed my time with Catherine Full Body. Puzzles and all. I did get a stupid ending where I ended up with nobody. I don't know how that's possible, but I did it. And it did kind of leave me with a sour taste in my mouth. And when it comes to endings in these types of games, I want to talk about it a little bit more after I play this next game. So for now, just keep it in the back of your head. All around, Catherine Full Body is great. An 8 out of 10 game, maybe even a 9 out of 10. It's the perfect blend of a visual novel and your more typical quote unquote real game. But the only real distinction from the two is that Captain has a different presentation than your average visual novel. And that's not even taking into account the super realistic all adult cast that doesn't feel like a bunch of random anime characters slapped onto one video game. For everything outside of the puzzle part, it could just be your standard VN with PNGs and MP4s. And I think this adds a lot more appeal than a lot of people are willing to give credit for. Like I said in the beginning, it's a lot easier for me to stomach this game than just starting off with your average visual novel. And many people are going to ignore a game and not give it a second chance if it looks a certain way. Since we're talking about Atlas games, there's a reason why people don't want to play Persona 3 Portable or don't classify it as the definitive version of Persona 3, even though it has a lot more content and revamped gameplay. And that's because instead of the overworld taking place in a 3D space, it plays like a visual novel outside of the combat. That is an instant turnoff for a lot of people. Yeah, realistically speaking, the gameplay of Portable and FES are virtually the same. But Portal is lacking some of that charm and immersion that you get from FES. When you lose that 3D environment, the game or the characters have to clearly state their actions so the player isn't lost in what's going on in the scene, which leads to a lot more things needed to be spelled out for the player instead of it just being shown.
There's someone else here? There's someone else here? Anyways, let's hide.
If you ask the average gamer would they rather move their cursor to talk to somebody or run up and talk to somebody, I think they're gonna pick the latter. And that's why I think looking at games like Captain and others on this list as visual novels alongside your more traditional visual novels is important. Also for the reasons I stated earlier about not wanting to doze off at the computer. Not yet. But now I gotta give the people what they came for. I'm going to play a real visual novel. Next on the visual novel hit list is, what the fuck? Milk inside a bag of milk, inside a bag of milk, inside a bag of milk. By a Russian developer named
Nikita Kryukov.
There are actually two games here, Milk Inside a Bag of Milk and Milk Outside a Bag of Milk. You play as a voice inside a girl's head as you make it easier for her to get milk from the store. In Milk Outside, you play the same role as the voice, but instead of guiding her to get milk from the store, you are talking to her after the events of the first game to soothe and cheer her up. The reason why she manifests the player is because she thinks it's easier to get through life if she believes herself to be inside a visual novel. So this means the player is not only the narrator but also her coping mechanism. I was made aware of this game while I was watching a video in the background and seeing it everywhere a few months ago. So you know what, my turn. I want to see what all the fuss is about. And after playing both games, the fuss was not understood. This shit confused me. On my first playthrough, I thought the games were both fine. There was nothing wrong with them. But I didn't see nothing that really stood out as special. But once I went back to replay the first game and get its bad ending, and I went back and 100%ed the second game, the hype made sense. I finally understand why everyone loves these games. Before we get into all that, let's talk about the elephant in the room. This game has the crudest art style that I've ever seen for a video game. And believe it or not, this does play a role in the game's message and story. And it's not just there because the budget consists of enough to buy something from the corner store. But honestly, it's a lot more interesting than just looking at 2D anime girls all day. So I'm not even going to question it too much and I'm not going to complain. This game kind of executes the whole use the medium to your advantage thing in a very unique type of way. In my case, I got the good ending for Inside of a Bag of Milk, and then got the most basic ending for Outside of a Bag of Milk. So when credits roll, I was just sitting there like, okay, so what now? If you really want to get the most out of both of these games, you're going to have to play them both fully. And it's definitely a lot different from a lot of the games I have on here. Because one playthrough of each game is not enough to see the entire picture of what's being told. And that's one of the strengths of it being a shorter game. You could tell a whole story with multiple messages and themes without stepping over the previous themes, as it doesn't take much time to actually just replay these games and get all the endings. In total, it took me around 5 hours to see everything. If you try taking that approach with a longer visual novel, you're gonna leave like 90% of the player base confused because they won't play again to get the other endings off the sheer length of the game alone. So each route and ending needs to be fulfilling to a certain extent. But back to the game. I personally think it's a great portrayal of mental health or even just social anxiety when you look at the first game in a vacuum. That constant voice in your head telling you everything that you're doing wrong and nitpicking every little thing that you do is so real. Low-key spoilers, but you play as one of the protagonist's medication that is supposed to help keep her mentally stable. And the goal of the first game is just to help her get milk. But due to what she has going on mentally, it makes the task a lot harder. So you end up getting this first-person POV of somebody else's thoughts, while you play as the quote-unquote narrator who is supposed to help her keep her thoughts in check. And it's not like it's that hard. All you really have to do is tell her things she wants to hear and be nice to her. And boom, you get the good ending. But for some fucked up reason you choose not to, this is the game over screen you get. And when she asks for your name again, just like how she did when you first started the game, and you give her the same name, she makes a remark about how you hopefully work this time. Is that not the hardest thing ever? You know Mr. was hype as hell when he put that line in the game. And with stuff like that, you can't get it in any other type of media but video game. But I will digress. When you end up finally getting to the store, you meet this thing. It kind of looks like when SpongeBob went to the trenches and this thing was at the concession stand or whatever. Nah, I don't know, maybe it's just a coincidence. Whatever it is, it's supposed to represent a human, and it just keeps saying "oh" as an oddly specific targeted form of rage bait, as our main character is scared of circles. I know the whole circle thing's a metaphor for something, but like, I don't know. I think I need to play more visual novels, and I'll come back to this. I'll crack this code. Once she finally makes it to the register with the milk, she starts to make stuff a lot harder than it has to be. For the simple fact she can't really process what the cashier is saying under the pressures of having other people behind her in line, which is real. There's been times where I'd be like, huh, or just blankly stare at someone's instructions when I'm unfamiliar with what they're telling me. And for a person who may be socially anxious, a situation like this might make it way worse. And that's the main reason why I like Milk Inside as a standalone game. In my eyes, it seems a lot more relatable to a wider range of people, me included. Milk Outside is still a great story, don't get me wrong, but you may not feel as heard as you would with Milk Inside, or not at least until you get the certain ending that really speaks to you and your struggles. But there's no real dialogue choices that will make you gravitate towards those endings, because the way you achieve those endings in Milk Outside seem completely arbitrary. And that's my main issue with Milk Outside. Some of the endings you get are based on conditions that have zero correlations with said endings. The most common and default ending relates back to Milk Inside. So at least when you get that ending, it doesn't seem too out of place or too random. But even though I know the conditions to get the ending, I can't tell you why my choices led me to that ending. There are only 2.5 out of the game's 5 total endings that I could come up with a conclusion on how my choices would get me there, with the 0.5 being a stretch. But despite that, all these endings are still good thematically and artistically, but you don't really do anything related to them to warrant you seeing them. For a game of this scale, I could look past it, but as visual novels are reliant on the player making choices, the outcome of those choices have to make sense. For example, liking Catherine Full Body, I was sure I was going to get one of Kate Catherine's endings, and I did, but I have no idea why I got the new ending where she leaves Vincent to pursue acting. Was it because I didn't completely written off the other Catherine? Or was it because I sent Catherine the video of Rin on the piano? I have no real clue. And it's not like the game mentions anything about her wanting to become an actor after I made these choices. She just straight up becomes an actor because she wanted to be free? Which goes against her whole character's point. Maybe this is just the visual novel's version of a skill issue, but it feels completely random. But it's not like I got the quote-unquote bad ending, as C. Catherine's new ending is completely different to her originals, but the game leading up to the end is completely the same no matter what path you're on. But my main point here is that if I'm making choices in a visual novel, the outcomes of my choices need to add up. But when it comes to Milk Inside and Out, they're still fantastic games. And even if you don't struggle with social anxiety or mental health, you will still enjoy these games. Like I said, it gives a great insight into what the psyche of a person who does struggle with these things go through. But the game does talk about serious topics, so proceed with caution. The overall idea of you being the medication, aka the secondary voice in her head, therefore the narrator, is a dope concept, but it really doesn't take advantage of the interactive medium. I mean, it does, but it doesn't do it in a way that I feel like it's truly compelling. Like, it's definitely not the best that we'll see today. Even though I'm lightly criticizing the interactivity of the game, there's still a few great moments inside Milk Inside a Bag of Milk that cannot be done in any other form of media. And when I look back on it, a lot of those things weren't even replicated inside any of the visual novels. Although yeah, they were very sparse, those few moments really did surprise me. And it definitely did make it worthwhile. So I really do think this game does deserve to be called a game.
Now you may say I'm really stretching the meaning of what a visual novel is. If you ask me, it's close enough. The game is literally all dialogue with little to no gameplay. There's gameplay, but the split's like 20-80. For those who are in the know, Mouthwashing is a psychological horror game, not a visual novel, where a crew of 5 members get stuck in space while delivering a company's product. The story is non-linear, so you will be jumping back and forth on the timeline as new information is revealed to the player. As for the gameplay, you're just walking around talking to the other crew members and doing minuscule tasks to advance the story. For example, making a cake, getting a key scanner, cutting foam, feeding pills to this dude. Yeah, I'm right with you, sister. Yeah. When it comes to the psychological horror game department, Mouthwashing excels in. Even when the game's not trying to be overly eerie, it still gave me chills.
Check on crew? What do you mean check on crew? Did someone... Nah.
And when it is trying,
What the fuck?
this might be one of the creepiest games I've ever played. The section of the game where you can't make too much noise walking on the graded floor, and the 1v1 on shipment, and then you got this scene too. You get the point. This game is truly unsettling. This is psychological horror done right. You don't always need a big fat monster chasing around to make you feel uneasy. But we aren't here for the heebie-jeebies. We're here to enrich our brains with the power of gamified literature. And for this game, I mean, there's not really much to say actually. The game's story is really good, and the way it's structured is also great. But there's only one ending. There's no dialogue options, the game just kind of plays out. There's zero input from the player besides completing these Among Us ass tasks, and you need to do them if you want to progress. So when it comes to the rest of the visual novels on here, the game's kind of lacking, but that's okay because it's a psychological horror game first. Visual novel never. But when people say visual novels are pointless forms of media, I think they assume every visual novel story plays out like Mouthwashing. And in that case, I mean, sure, but it's a psychological horror game first, so it doesn't really matter. You can't turn this into a book. What are you gonna do? Be reading the book and boom, jump scare?
And if that's the case, then you gotta tee up. But even though this is a shorter game, it does use the medium to its advantage to make a lot of these scenes a lot creepier than they would be in like a movie or something, by bending reality and making the player feel lost in certain scenes. But when it comes to the story, this game does nothing different from your average story game. So this would be an example of a game that does not use the medium to its advantage at all. But don't get me wrong, I'm not hating on this game. This game's amazing. You have to play it. I don't even want to spoil. I can't even go into much detail without really spoiling the game, but you have to play it. The atmosphere of this game and the straight dread you feel playing it is unrivaled. That along with the story just makes it a must play. This next game I also have is something special. It's going to be the exact opposite from Mouthwashing when it comes to using the medium to its advantage. Slay the Princess is, well, a visual novel. Yes, a real one this time. But god damn, I really gotta look at words and read all day? Oh.
You're on a path in the woods, and at the end of that path...
Alright, I'm
is a
locked in.
carriage.
This is game of the year. The game starts off simple. You have a narrator who is warning you about not completing the job of, well, if you couldn't guess, slaying the princess. And he spends the entire first minute constantly reminding you that she is not to be trusted. This game has a very unique drawn art style, which not only is eye candy, but just different from the norm. I loved looking at Slay the Princess.
This was probably one of the most interesting looking visual novels today.
In fact, the entire game's presentation is way different from the norm. This game includes full voice acting, and it's serviceable. Hey, if you're gonna read from me, I'm really not gonna complain. When you start playing this game, something you'll notice very quickly is that you have a lot of dialogue options and they come frequently. A lot of them don't progress the story, but let you ask questions that further your understanding of the game and what the hell is going on, because trust me, you will need it. You thought Milk was confusing? I still don't know what this game is really about. But that's what separates this game from the others so far. Also for the fact that 2 out of the 4 games weren't really visual novels. But unlike Milk Inside and Out, the amount of dialogue options and meaningful choices you get are tenfold. And if we're talking relatively, there are way more meaningful choices than there are in Catherine. And the reason why there are so many meaningful dialogue options compact into a short amount of time is due to the way the story is set up. The game is split up into different loops, and each loop has around 3 chapters, where the task remains the same, to kill the princess. But through your dialogue choices, each chapter, therefore each loop, should play out differently from your last. Without getting into any spoilers, the real objective of the game is to see several versions of the princess. So by the very nature of this game, it could not be anything but a visual novel. This is the best use of the medium yet. It's hard to talk about this game without really getting into spoilers, but this game is a trip. I had a blast playing it, and to my surprise, it's actually pretty funny. Especially when you start to get into the later chapters, the humor just goes off the rails. I think this game is supposed to be a commentary on relationships and what it means to be a partner or something. Actually no, let me try using my newly found brain cores from playing these visual novels. So what is actually going on in this game is that it's a love story, and it's not your traditional type. This story also includes themes of trust and betrayal, and depending on the routes you get, the story will focus on a combination of those 3 elements and how they interact with each other to display all the forms that the concept of love may end up taking. Or man, sound like that, this is not supposed to be an hour-long narrative breakdown of the game. I barely understand how this game's universe even works. I think this game is the best example of what can make a visual novel so special within the medium. You get all these choices, and how you want to go about the scenario in front of you is your choice. You can ask whatever you want to further your understanding of the world and the story. And if you don't want to learn more, well, 1, you're not really playing the game right, and 2, you just straight up don't have to. You simply cannot get that in any other form of media except video games. After finishing this game once, I went back to check the scenes and princesses I saw, and it wasn't even half of them. I was in awe with a straight side of confusion. How could there really be this many routes? This is a work of a genius. The developers need to be glazed until there's no more honey left. Just like in Milk In and Out, the shorter format of this game lends to its replayability. But unlike Milk, this game makes those replayed attempts a lot more engaging. You still might find yourself skipping around already read dialogue, but there are still whole scenes where you're still gonna have to question your choices and how they will affect the story. And unlike in Milk and Catherine, the ending of the routes make perfect sense. The game truly makes you feel like you're damn near in control of the whole story. Of course, this formula would never work in a visual novel that is supposed to take 8 or, God forbid, 24 hours, as you would not only have to write that, but that times 15. And for the average development team, that's just an unfeasible task, especially when you want each of those many routes to be just as fulfilling as the last. If I could force a naysayer to play at least one visual novel, this would be the game, 100%. There's no way anyone with an actual brain will sit down and play this and say, yeah, this shit is boring. If you can't sit down and play this game to completion at least once, you're a lost cause, and the next game is going to be way beyond you. I wish I could say more on this game, but it's really hard to talk about this game without going into spoilers, and I feel like everyone needs to play this game, so there will not be no post-review glazing. But just know this is peak visual novels here, and I know I'm saying that without playing the classics, but half of those classics are freaked the fuck out, so it doesn't even matter. But now that I think about it, why are some visual novels just widely accepted to be popular in the West? Of course you have your cult classics like Tsukihime and Fate Stay at Night, but those are popular for people who are into visual novels. Like, there are visual novels in the West that are popular just because they're games. You might classify these games as YouTube Let's Player games, and that's where they get most of their popularity from. And you can even debate if the fans of the game are players of the game, if you know what I'm talking about. But a lot of these games aren't just straight visual novels. A lot of them are puzzle-based detective games. A few that come to mind is obviously Danganronpa and Ace Attorney.
and maybe this is because of my personal experience, but you cannot tell me Tsukihime is more popular than either of those games. But what I think it just comes down to is that Western players don't just want a raw visual novel. Americans don't want to read. They want their actions to dictate the drama of the story. Most people I know don't want to sit idly by while a story plays itself. They want to be the main reason why the story moves forward. And like I was saying earlier about Persona 3 FPS versus Persona 3 Portable, a lot of it does come down to the game's presentation. If the game presents itself and all they see in their minds are bland PNGs, what do you think is going to happen to their perception of the game? And keep this in mind when I start talking about the next game, which so happens to be... Yeah, no, at this point I really don't want to talk about this game. I played it, I didn't finish it, but when it comes down to this video, I really have nothing to say about my side. It's a horror game, a psychological horror. There is a visual novel portion of the game. I was gonna trick y'all into it, but to me, my side is more of a video game than Mouthwashing is. My side has you doing way too much for it to just be called a visual novel, and it doesn't really fit in the theme of this video. And when it comes to the novel aspect of it, my side really has no story that is worth telling. Not to say that the game is stupid and unwarranted, it's actually kind of fun, I will admit, but it has no purpose being in this video, so I'm scrapping it. If anything, this game belongs in a video about dating sims and trying to find love inside of video games, as I feel like the message it's trying to push is the antithesis of that. But if you just look at it from the outside, it looks like a game where it's not. But yeah, that's all I really got to say about my side for now. Maybe I'll talk about it later. It is an interesting game. It's also a pretty funny game, I'm not gonna lie. There's a part of the game where she says she needs 5 minutes and she actually takes 5 minutes to do that. I had to load up a game of Showdown to pass the time. I was beyond shocked. I'm not asking for too much. I just need you... This game was a super random pick. I had to play at least one dating sim, so I found a list of the most popular ones, excluding the ones that are like jokes or subversions to the genre, and threw a dart at the wall. And that dart landed here, on one of the best pieces of media I've ever seen. So far, I've only done one of the game's 5 routes, and to know there are potentially 4 more great stories coming, it's kinda crazy to think about and gets me excited to go back and play, if those routes have the same level of writing that I experienced on my first playthrough. This game plays like what probably comes to mind when you hear the words visual novel. Very bland looking, there's not a lot that would make it stand out to the average person, but I promise this game has something under the hood. And that's not even accounting for this game's very unique premise. The premise of this game is something I guarantee you will not guess if you aren't looking. Katawa Shojou is a romantic visual novel where the protagonist suffers a heart attack due to his undiagnosed condition, and is sent off to a special school for anyone who is impaired or needs regular doctoring and monitoring. Therefore, all 5 potential love interests has some sort of disability. Yes, to get the obvious out the way, this game has a very high chance of being extremely disingenuous and lack any type of taste or nuance. I was putting a lot of faith in the fact that this game is highly rated. I can say wholeheartedly that this game avoids all of those traps, for the most part. And at this point, I'm pretty comfortable with visual novels. Time to Beat is not going to scare me. The structure of this game is like a watered down but elongated version of what Slay the Princess had. Where that game structure kind of looked like this, Katawa Shojo's looks something like this instead, from what I assume of playing both games. Actually, let me fact check that. Yeah, and this all lines up seeing how Katawa Shojou is supposed to take you 8 hours on one route. Like to any good story, the game starts off with a prologue. The prologue spends its time setting up our main character and how he feels about his new diagnosis while being treated in the hospital. Later he is told he's being moved to a new school for the disabled, which you could assume he's not too happy about. And that leads us into chapter 1, where we are sent off to the school to meet all our new classmates. This chapter is slow. The number of IG real breaks I took playing through this first chapter is probably in the 50s. The game doesn't leave chapter 1 until you lock down a love interest, so you will be introduced to everybody. Some of the girls have more screen time naturally than others, so you really don't get to see all of their personalities on display during your first run of the game, unless you're picking the right dialogue options to see more of each character. And if this is supposed to be some of the introductions, some of them don't even have the time to really do so, which is kind of a problem. One of them straight up gets too shy and runs away if you don't pick the right dialogue options. But hey, that's the fun of visual novels, ain't it? When I said you won't leave chapter 1 without locking in a love interest, I meant it. You can get the default fail state scene where you just end up dying. I was shocked when I got this scene on my second run. I just wanted to see what character it would default me to. I would have never thought I was going to get a game over in a visual novel. You know how butt you gotta be at a game to get a game over in a visual novel? Bro, this was top 5 most embarrassing things for me. But once you do get to chapter 2, you are locked into that route for the rest of the game. There's no halftime calls for a trade, you're stuck there for life. Each of the 5 routes have a neutral, good and bad ending, and depending on the choices you make in that route, you may or may not have access to those endings. I ended up getting Rin's route, a member of the art club with half her arms missing. On my second playthrough, I got Hanako, the shy one, with what I believe to be burn marks. I haven't made it far enough into her route to actually know what's going on with her. Wait a second, now that I'm looking at it, you might be the one. Because this game is a dating sim, kind of, not really though, getting the good ending means you get with the girl of that route. So that begs the question, how is the romance? As an avid romance anime and manga consumer, enjoyer, and connoisseur, I can confidently say that Katawa Shojou is up there. Rin's story alone is nuts. This isn't a fairy tale friends to lovers story. There's actual turbulence between the two parties. Rin isn't some girl with a unique golden personality you get to pick because she's your favorite and will fall in love with you unconditionally just because you picked her to. She feels like a real character with actual depth and an actual story, which made it a lot easier to get sucked inside the narrative. The best type of romance stories are the ones where neither party are initially into each other from the start, allowing for the characters to grow and shine instead of being instantly head over heels for the other, doing the most irrational things for a person they just met. And this game does a great job of this. This isn't a story about kissing girls. Well, I mean, it's not just a story about kissing girls. It's about not letting your attributes define you as a person and learning to live and adapt with those attributes on the surface. But once you really start to get deep into these characters' stories, it gets a lot deeper than that. As the further you go into their stories, them being disabled is not really the main driving factor in their characterization or their stories. Playing through Rin's route was one of the best romance experiences I've ever seen. She's one of the best characters ever. The dating sim genre has a stigma of being played by weirdos who don't go outside, who don't interact with real women, objectifying women, and only exist for wish fulfillment, and worst of all, just being plain boring. And after playing this game, I can confidently say that I'm not a weirdo. And how could I be? I'm only playing games with deep intellectual storytelling. Yeah, ain't nothing weird going on here. Everything else is fair game though. One thing I can say about Katawa Shojou is that it doesn't objectify the girls in the game. There's no weird perverted one-off gags in the game that make me roll my eyes whenever I see them, at least from what I remember. Unless you count the dude running into the bathroom schmeed out, but like that's man on man, so it doesn't really count. Of course there's gonna be a little bit of objectification, as getting the girl to fall in love with you is the literal objective of the game. If it wasn't, then the ending where they say I love you wouldn't be the quote unquote good ending. But to me, this game is as much as a dating sim as Fortnite is a survival game. Like, this game has elements of a dating sim, but it's not really a dating sim. You don't really have the control over your character like you do in your average dating sim. The main character has their own personality that, although is not that strong, ultimately leads you to being a viewer in most of the situations. It's almost like you're reading a book. The benefit to this is that the chemistry between the two characters feels genuine and the story is moving at its own pace. That's not to say you can't write natural chemistry in a typical dating sim, but it's a lot easier here when the game already has an established, well-defined pace. The game, to yes, my surprise too, does have lewd material in it, but it is very rare and doesn't rear its head until the very last hours of a route. I truly did not know this game had scenes like this. Steam over here making it seem like this game is an under 18 experience and it's just a little cute romance story, then all of a sudden fruit pops up on my screen. Boom, next day. What? You don't get a sneak peek, no nothing of what just happened. Just next scene. And I can't speak on other routes, but at least for Rin's, that first scene is pretty important to the story. Yes, on some I watched it for the plot. even leading to a route ending argument the very next day. So yes, I did have to look up the transcript for the scene because the main character started tripping out of nowhere. I would have liked to make a joke about how much descriptive detail goes into the scene compared to the others, but it's not any different from the normal paragraph long scene descriptions. And I'm not gonna lie, I was not expecting that scene to matter so much in the context of the story. Usually scenes like this are supposed to be a reward for the player, but that first fruit scene isn't all sunshines and rainbows. This game's story is surprisingly super deep, even when bringing up the intimacy between two people who are on the fence about each other. And the second sex scene is exactly what you would think the first one would also be like, virtually pointless. You can remove the second one from the game and it does nothing to the story. And like I've been repeating, this game's story is surprisingly deep. And when you look at the game for the first time, you really don't expect it to be. And shit, I wouldn't blame you if you look at this game and just wrote it off, cause look! This game has the worst presentation out of all the visual novels today. Although to this game's credit, it's not crude like the Milk games, which is a very low bar to clear, but it's definitely not interesting looking like the Milk games. When we're talking about the game's look, there's really nothing going on. This game looks like it has zero depth besides the characters being, you know, there's nothing that screams hidden gem. And even while playing the game doesn't really give the user much to look at besides for a few special unique scenes that yes are visually appealing, but they are so few and far between. Sometimes the game even tries its hand at animating the sprites, and it just looks like people playing with paper on sticks. But if because of this you think all visual novels are visually starved, you have yet to see what games like Witch of the Holy Night are capable of. When I was looking at quote unquote gameplay for this game, I swear there was at least 20 different unique pieces of art for every scene. But with a game like Katawa Shojou, you have to make do with what you got because clearly there wasn't a big budget here. And it doesn't really matter because the story is the reason why we're all playing this. At least that's the reason why I'm playing. I don't know what other people got going on. In a game like Katawa Shojou, you're lucky to even see one piece of unique artwork per scene. And per scene might be pushing it. You might not even see one per day. And I'm not even talking about in the game. I'm talking about in real life. But this is not something I hold against the game. It's just something I've noticed compared to other visual novels, especially the more higher production ones, like the newer ones you would get from Type Moon. And since we're talking about Type Moon games already, and the purpose of visual novels in the gaming medium, why does Witch of the Holy Night only have one ending? Good thing the game's like 40 hours long, so I would never play it. But if I had, I would put that on D tier. What do you mean there's only one ending? Books only have one ending. Like, you're gonna give all the visual novels bad PR. Like, I'm trying to fight against this right now. What are you doing? As a visual novel, well, it doesn't get more visual and novel than this. I mean, it does, but like, the point is that this game is a visual novel to its core. There's nothing glamorous or special about it besides the cast. But what this game has is not just a great story, but potentially 5. And that is something that just cannot be downplayed. The only thing I think would make this game a lot more game-like would be a greater use of an interweb scene setup, like how the game was in Chapter 1. Once you get past the first chapter, you could literally just read the transcript for each character's route online, and then you'll end up roughly with the same experience. You'll probably be a lot more comfortable too just reading it in your bed or somewhere that's not your average desktop setup. Having more scenes, let alone just having more dialogue options, would have gone a long way. But saying that, knowing there are 5 fully fleshed out routes could be a lot to ask for. It's hard to talk about all the characters as I did not and will not be playing through all of their routes, but from what I saw, the main cast is very likable. At the start, they're pretty one-dimensional, but as you get further into the game and even in Chapter 1 a little bit, you start to see a little bit more complexity to each character. Even if you're not on a specific character's route, you still get a glimpse of what they're really like. For example, Emmy seems like your typical sporty, happy, overly hyper competitive person, but during Ren's route, there's a lot of scenes that hint to something deeper about her personality and her motives, which is a good thing because it makes you want to go back and play through her route. Not me though. If you're going in thinking that this is just another dating sim, you're going to be disappointed. Unlike in traditional dating sims where the player is given a lot of freedom on how they want to pursue each girl and when they want to, you're simply just stuck to the route that you get after Chapter 1. And if that's not your thing, there are many other games that aren't structured linearly. Unlike the rest of the games on here, it's really hard for me to recommend this game to the average gamer because of its gameplay. If you like reading romance manga that have deeper stories and themes than what is usually provided, or just stories with complex characters, you will enjoy playing through Katawa Shojou. I know I will probably be going back and finishing Hanako's route, And maybe eventually I might even triple dip and see why I see no evil and hear no evil or beefing. I spent a lot of time comparatively talking about this game, and that's because I do think this game is special as a visual novel, and I think any fan of the genre will enjoy this game. I just ultimately wish the player played a bigger role in the story than they actually did. But hey, if even talking to girls in the game is too hard for you, then the next game gives you no player agency, so you can't mess up.
What the fuck is that supposed to
Damn!
She'll be alright, man. She'll be alright.
Valhalla Cyberpunk Bartending Action, a game where you mix drinks and change lives. And before I get into it, I just want to say thank you to anyone who's made it to this point. I appreciate you sticking with me through this long ass journey. Valhalla to some is a game that needs no introduction, but for someone like me up until this point who've only heard this game in passing, this game follows a 27-year-old bartender and her interactions between customers over a period of 19 days. During these interactions, you will be asked to do your job and make drinks. And that's about it. When you boil it down, you're really just listening to people's problems and making drinks on the side. So what do I personally think about the game? The game is not exciting to me at all, I cannot lie. Not to say that the story is bad or anything, but the game had a hard time keeping me hooked past the 3-hour mark. Although once I did get farther into the story, that problem was resolved, but it had nothing to do with the core of the gameplay. This game feels like my least favorite part of the modern Persona games, or metaphor, the social links. Or even something like the bar sections in Captain, but forced. There's nothing wrong with the social links or that part of Captain. In fact, I like them a lot. They are a great change of pace from the other half of the gameplay. Only issue is in Valhalla, there is no other half of the gameplay. The only other part is the bartending, and I just don't find that compelling. This part of the game is going to be hard for me to critique, and there are interesting uses of it, but for the most part I find it very pointless to the point of it being tedious. The customer will ask for a drink by name, flavor, or type, and you will make it. Some other customers will ask for a drink in an abstract type of way, asking for like a drink that only transcends gender norms. Whole time they're just asking for a piano woman instead of a piano man. Sometimes you actually have to be listening to what the characters say, as Jill will straight up just not remember or get lost in her own thoughts. Real. I won't lie, it caught me off guard a few times, especially at the beginning. And it's kind of realistic, so I don't think it soils the gameplay, it only makes it a little bit more funkier in a good way. These are both needed annoyances that make the game not be mindless. To be honest, I wish there was more things like this in this game, because without it, there's zero room for error with a lot of these orders. And for 80% of them, the order might as well just make itself. But ignore all that, the conversations you have with the regulars are the main pull factor of this game. And they're not bad, they're actually really entertaining. But they weren't entertaining enough for me to keep playing beyond 3 in-game days in one sitting. And I know it sounds like I'm being overly harsh on the game, it's just my preference of video games. Even though visual novels are already not my type of game, this game specifically just wasn't for me. I wish I got to see a lot of these characters outside of this gameplay loop, because they are undeniably the only reason why you should play Valhalla, which is not a diss at the game because that is what the game is centered on. A game like this is gonna live or die by its characters, because it sure ain't dependent on that gameplay. And according to a vast majority of people, this game gets it. Going into this, you can't expect them to be as deep as some of the characters from the previous games, just because of how the stories of the games are set up. But even with that said, you still see a lot of personality behind these characters. Being the bartender means you go from making awkward small talk to eventually getting real comfortable with a lot of the regulars to the point where they start to open up with you. Even Jill, our main character, will end up doing the same with certain customers. The first customer serves as the best example of what this game is about. He comes off as completely rude and arrogant. Once he comes in a few more times and you learn about him, we actually find out a little bit more about him, and it turns out he's actually rude and arrogant. But there's actually a reason for it. That customer doesn't matter too much because he's not even close to the game's highlights. But you get the idea. The more the customers come in, the closer you get to them. There are definitely more filler characters than just Devin, like this asshole in the brain. They don't come in as frequently as the more important and interesting guests, but they're definitely necessary for shaking things up and letting Jill's personality shine in different situations, which I do like. A lot of the funniest parts of this game come from these random guests that come in once in a while. As for the game's overarching story, it doesn't really exist until you get to chapter 2. That's when Jill will start to open up about her past and her personal life. Before that, you only get a glimpse of a story vicariously through what the customers tell you and by keeping up with the news. And even through this, there are some good moments, which I won't mention because I think they're too good to be spoiled. It kind of lets the player piece together a narrative in their head using all the information that is drip fed to them by all the characters. And if that's not your type of storytelling, then you will lose interest in this game pretty fast, which was my experience up until Jill actually started talking about her past. Through Jill's story in Katawa Shojou, it made me realize what kind of stories I'm actually interested in and what I would be willing to play. And now that I know that, I could avoid a lot more visual novels that would simply not interest me. And I encourage everyone to find a visual novel that speaks to them either through the gameplay or the plot of the story. Although the whole cast is amazing on their own right, Jill was the highlight of the game for me. This may not mean too much because the bar isn't that high, but Jill is my favorite protagonist out of all the visual novels that I played. And that might just because she's the most realistic protagonist out of all of them. And I can't blame them because, I mean, look at the bullshit they gotta go through. All the protagonists got some demons they're fighting figuratively and literally. Well, all Jill has to do is show up for work and speak. I bet the rest of the protagonists would kill to be in Jill's shoes. And since we're giving flowers to the characters of Valhalla, I gotta say Sai and Alma are my favorites. Valhalla isn't really like the other visual novels on here when it comes to dialogue options and controlling the narrative. It's closer to Mouthwashing on the VN scale. There are no dialogue options in the game ever, which was kinda disappointing to me. The closest thing you get is a game of truth or dare. I wish the game had some dialogue options that allowed the player to ask questions about the customer's lives or push their thinking, or even taking a step further and having those dialogue options of how frequently the customers came in. But maybe at that point I'm just asking for too much. But the first one is definitely a possibility. After finishing the game and doing some post-game analysis, you could have the customers give different dialogues if you get them drunk enough when you're making an alcohol optional drink. The only issue is that I was loading up some of the customers at the start and saw no difference. Maybe this mechanic is so well integrated into the game that it's hard for you to even notice without triggering it on purpose. But shit, if I never looked it up, I would have never noticed. And I don't know if I should praise the game for that or not, because it perfectly makes sense in the context of real life and the game. But if you never played the game before and analyzed every single piece of dialogue, then you wouldn't know if you triggered it or not. But now that I do see the player does actually have some effect on the game, I personally do have to take it back. Good job, Valhalla, you surprised me. But unfortunately, I hate to say it, but this game was just not for me. I really want to like this game. Everyone hypes it up as a hidden gem within the genre, but the way the game is structured did not make me want to hop back on the next day like Slay the Princess or Katawa Shojou did. But even though the game is not for me, I could 100% say that this is a great game, and I don't regret a second that I gave to this game. If you are a person who likes the social link aspect of the Persona games, then I feel like you would like Valhalla. If you do the social links because they're just in the game, then this game might not be for you either. But I will say give it a chance. If you get through the first 5 nights and you just can't feel yourself being attached to the game, it's no worries. This game could definitely just be a slice of life comedic anime or something like that. There's not a lot keeping this game from it not being anything but a game. From what I've seen, the New Game Plus endings are complete extras. So I don't know how this game's replay value really holds up. Any control the player gets in this game is negligible and doesn't factor into the overall story like I feel like visual novels should be. And for that reason alone, it kinda does make it a disinteresting experience as a video game for me. But overall, it doesn't ruin the story for me. So if any of that sounded interesting to you, just give it a try. It's not that expensive, it's not that long. Did you really think I was gonna go the entire time without talking about the music? I really didn't know when to put it in, but since Valhalla has some of the best music I've ever heard, we might as well just do it right here at the end. Valhalla's music is great. The only issue I have with it is that it kind of plays whenever you feel like playing it. Most of the songs aren't tied to any theme or any person. So coming from a game like Katawa Shojou where the music is either tied to a person, place, or emotion, going back to listen to Valhalla's music for this project just kind of felt like playing an album. But if that album was played during a specific part of your life, it wasn't really tied to a specific thing. It's a little hard to explain, so let me try giving an example. So like when I hear this track, I immediately think about the student council girls. And speaking of the student council theme, why am I the only person being recommended this video? Like, is this not a little crazy? Why does this thing only have 82 views and I'm like 10 of them? Anyways, when I hear this track from Valhalla, It doesn't remind me of anything from the game except for the fact that it was a part of the game. And it's not that big of a deal, but hearing certain tracks from Katawa Shojou really does bring me back to those good ass moments. And because these games can be very long, good music is a necessity. And both of these games have amazing soundtracks. Going in, I knew that Valhalla had an amazing soundtrack that was highly regarded, but Katawa Shojou did surprise me. At first, I didn't really mess with a lot of the tracks, but as I got deeper into the game, I started to like them more and more. To the point where after finishing the game and going back to listen to some of the music just brings straight joy to my soul. Like I say, it's akin to that first Fortnite Christmas lobby theme. Like just hearing it just brings me back. I just can't help but smile. And Shoji Meguro, the composer for Full Body, did a great job with that soundtrack too. He's one of the greatest composers in video game history in my book. No matter what the game is, he always seems to have a great sound for it. Up until now, I thought JRPGs and fighting games were the only genres that the music really mattered this much. Like in course in other genres they have great music too, but it doesn't stick with me the same way that it does with a JRPG. Like there are still tracks from Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire that I could just hum off the top of my head. But now I could do that with all the visual novels in this project. Except for Mouthwashing, to be honest, but that game uses its music very differently than everything else here. But if I had to pick one game out of all of them today that I say had the best OST, it's Valhalla, and it's not even close. Like there's really no room for argument. If it wasn't for the simple fact that the music in the game wasn't tied to anything, I would say it's up there with one of my best OSTs of all time. But if we're just talking track for track, it's definitely like top 5. But if you ask me what was my favorite theme, it has to go to Rin's theme, Purity. That shit's a certified banger. I even added the Milk Outside of a Bag of Milk vinyl to my collection. That was a soundtrack that I was surprised that I even liked that much. But here it is in my collection. Crazy to think they still had it on sale after I beat the game. So of course I had to buy it. And with that said, I'm done. I really finished this. This took a minute to complete, I'm not gonna lie. Maybe if I had more free time it would have been done way faster, but I don't. There's a lot of games that I really wish I could have added to here, but I've already spent around 100 hours on these games total, and I don't even know how long it took to make this. Maybe I'll go back and play some of the classics, but at this moment, I need to play something else. I need to get back to Metaphor. I do want to do this again, maybe with another genre. Maybe single player shooters, or maybe survival horror, or maybe non-Atlas RPGs, I don't know. Shit, I'll take recommendations at this point. But yeah, thank you for making it to the end. I really do appreciate it. Kisses for all. Mwah.